Lesson 8.5, Graphing Quadratic Equations, and this is our first lesson. I'm going to ask that you get a graphing calculator out of the yellow filing cabinet top drawer, and you will need that to do this lesson. And when you do that, please make sure that you go and press the window button, or the range, I'm sorry, it's the range button, and it'll say window, and you want to make sure that these are typed in, that your screen looks like this. It says X minimum is 9.6, X max is 9.4, X scale is 1, Y minimum negative 6.4, Y max 6.2, Y scale 1, and then X resolution is 1. Make sure that that window reads those numbers, so that you need to push the range key. That's the range key, okay? Use the range key to press that, and then those should appear. If it's not there, you're going to need to move the cursor using the up and down arrows to the correct location, and then change those numbers so it looks like this. I would pause the video here, double check, and make sure that those numbers are set in the range. Okay, so now that you've got your window set, the range set on the graphing calculator that you took out of that drawer of the filing cabinet, what I want you to do from here is, now there is a table that I want you to copy. So you're going to need to pause the video here, and this table, it needs to be copied into your notebook. And you want to have all 4 columns, and you want to have it where we have all of the equations, and then you're going to have the vertex column, what we call the axis of symmetry, and the shift from x squared. So why don't you pause the video here and then record this table, please. Now the vertex, just to remind you, that is the lowest point on a parabola, lowest or the highest point on a parabola. Well, that is the point where the parabola turns and changes directions. It may have been going down, now it changes and goes back up, or it's been going up and now it's coming back down. So that is the lowest or highest point on a parabola. That's what the vertex is, and that's one of the things you're going to take a look at on the graphing calculator. Also, another thing that you're going to take a look at is what we call the axis of symmetry. And the axis of symmetry looks as it is there. Is essentially, it's an imaginary line that cuts the parabola in half. So just to draw you an example here, if I have a parabola going like this, oops, that wasn't very good. Let me try that again, please. A parabola looking like this. Okay, so it's going up like this. Okay, and the axis of symmetry is just an imaginary line that I can just kind of draw right down the middle of my parabola. And what you notice is that every point on the right side of the parabola is the same distance from this line as every point on the left. So if I have a dot here, and they are both on this line, this Y line going across, we would then say that the 2 red dots that I have just drawn on top of the parabola, those dots are both the same distance from the axis of symmetry. Yeah, in other words, if you fold over the left half of the parabola, fold it over the top of the right half, they would match up now. And just to draw you an example on the vertex to show you what I mean by that, the vertex being that point on a parabola here, like this. I have 2 parabolas here. I'm going to draw 2 of them. One is pointing up, the other one's pointing down. Okay, and I apologize, I'm at the best drawing parabolas, but you should be able to get the point. This is like the vertex because that's where it changes directions. This would be a vertex on this one. That one's not drawn very well. But it is that point where the parabola changes directions. Okay, so now back to our table. What are we going to do with our table? Well, the first thing is I want you to take the graphing calculator and I want you to push the Y equals key. And if there are any equations inside the window there, please delete them and clear them out. Then the next thing to do is on the first line is type in the first equation that I have here. All you need to type in is x squared. Everything in your textbook when you see it will be written f of x equals x squared. This is just function notation again. The function of x. In other words, what answer will you get when I put a certain number in? So I want you to type x squared. Now the x key looks like this on the TI-81. It looks like this. It has this on it, and that will allow you to draw in the letter x on the graphing calculator. So you want to type x plus the x up and down t key, which is, I'm just going to call that the x key, and then you're going to push x squared. There's a little x squared function on there, and that will put an x squared. And then I want you to push the graph key. I want you to push the graph key. And what you'll see there is you'll get a parabola. That is our base parabola. All right. And what you should notice is, where does that parabola then turn? Well, where it turns is, if I want you to find that out, what you're going to do is push this key. It's called trace. It's called trace. So push that key and you will see a little blinking cursor there that shows up on the parabola. When you press the trace key on the x squared function, what you'll notice is that it shows up, and at the bottom of the screen it says x equals 0 and y equals 0. When you press the trace key, it will always show up, that trace cursor will always show up on the y-axis. So in this case, it's right on our vertex, because that is that point. So in your table, I want you to put that the vertex is x equals 0. And the axis of symmetry, and actually we could say it's 0, 0. Let me erase that. Our vertex is just is 0, 0. So we want to put that coordinate in there. So the vertex is 0, comma 0. The axis of symmetry does happen to be the y-axis. So we're just going to say that that is where x equals 0, because that is the line that cuts the parabola in half. And then the shift from x squared, well, there is no shift here. So what you're going to see now as we start to go through some of these in the table, as you start going through them, you're going to be writing down a shift over here in this column. You're going to notice some shifts. So let's take a look now. I want you to now go back and press y equals again. We will keep x squared on line 1. So use a down arrow and go to line 2, and then type x squared plus 3, and then press graph. What you're going to notice when you press graph, the first graph that it does is always going to be x squared. The second graph is whatever you put on line 2. Now let's take a look. The vertex has changed. So if we press the trace key, let's press it, and now use the up arrow, and that will take you to the vertex of the new graph. Because where is this graph at? It's up above it. Though that on the bottom of the screen, I'm looking for my vertex. That's at 0, comma 3. And where is my axis of symmetry? It is the same as x squared. It's x equals 0. What is my shift? My shift is that the parabola went up 3. Okay, so now what do I do next? I'm going to go back, and you need to go back and press y equals. Now go down to line 2 and make the changes on line 2 for the next one. So instead of a plus 3, I'm just going to use the arrow over, and I'm going to type minus 4. And then I'm going to press graph. Now at any time that you need to during this, you pause the video and stop and make sure you can take a look at your graph, and then you can try to fill your numbers in on your paper. So just to keep going here a little bit with you, you have x squared minus 4. Well, when you do that, notice now if I press trace, it shows up on the x squared graph. Press the down arrow, and notice it's going to shift to the other line. So now my vertex here, instead of being 0, 0, is now 0, negative 4. My axis of symmetry is x equals 0. My shift here is down 4. What happens next? Well, let's go back here. Now I've got things inside parentheses. Before I had the x squared, and the squared was right beside the x. Now here I have parentheses. I have x minus 5, and then a squared on the outside of the parentheses. So press y equals. Go to the second line. And then now press clear. And clear that line out. And now type a parenthesis. And x minus 5, parenthesis. Then press the x squared key. Now you may press graph. Notice now you have two parabolas on your graph. And let's press the trace key, and notice it shows up on our base function of x squared. And if you press the, when I tried to press, I'm sorry, when you press the trace key, it shows up again on the 0, 0. You won't be able to get this to shift over to the other graph. At least I'm not able to get it to do it. So take a look though at that parabola. What you'll notice, you may need to count on your screen, count the spaces. It's counting by 1. You'll see that it does shift over to the right. So what's our vertex? Well, our vertex is 0 because the graph didn't move up or down. And how far to the right does it go? Well, my apologies, it's not 0. Notice it does shift to the right. It does shift to the right. So my vertex here, if I count over 5 spaces, my vertex actually is 5, comma 0. 5, comma 0. What is my axis of symmetry? My axis of symmetry is where x equals 5. If you drew an imaginary line up and down on that second parabola, it would be where x equals 5. Notice 5 matches the first part of the coordinate of the vertex. Up here it was always 0 and matched 0 and 0 and 0. Well, now your axis of symmetry is always your x part of your coordinate of your vertex. Our shift here was then right 5. Okay. Next, this table, x plus 5 squared. So let's go back to y equals. And let's go to the second line. And let's just arrow over, and instead of having it say minus 5, change the minus to a plus, and then press graph. You should now be able to kind of predict a little bit. And you'll notice that this one has a shift to the left. The vertex here is not positive 5, 0, it's negative 5, 0. So write in negative 5, 0 on your table. And then you're going to say that it's x equals negative 5 because the axis of symmetry is always the x part of the coordinate of my vertex. And this is a shift left 5. All right, at this point now, I'm going to just stop the video here because it's gone out 13 minutes. And I want you to continue to go to line 2 and continue to enter these functions that are over here in the table. And see if you can figure out what is your axis of symmetry, your vertex and the axis of symmetry, and what the shift is. The next two have 2 shifts. Then you're going to see here what happens with a negative in front, and then what happens to the parabola when you put a 5 in front of x squared or a fraction in front of it. And take a look at it. So there's 3 things down here: negatives, and a big number, a number greater than 1 in front of x squared, or a number between 0 and 1, in other words, a proper fraction, and and a negative with a integer in front of x squared. So I'll let you finish this table out, and when you finish it, I do have an answer key, and you're more than welcome to take a look at it. And if you got any questions, feel free to ask.